Max's ears snapped forward like radar dishes, his entire body going rigid in the passenger seat of the K9 unit. Officer Sarah Collins felt the tension radiating from her partner before she even noticed his low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the entire vehicle. "What is it, boy?" Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her service weapon as she scanned the quiet Atlanta street they'd been patrolling for the past 2 hours. Nothing seemed out of place in the industrial district, just the usual collection of warehouses and auto shops baking under the late afternoon Georgia sun. Without warning, Max launched himself against the car door, his claws scraping frantically at the reinforced window. His behavior was unlike anything Sarah had seen in their 6 years together. The Belgian Malinois was trained to perfection, disciplined to a fault, but right now he looked wild with desperation, his amber eyes wide with something that bordered on panic. "Easy, Max. Talk to me." Sarah pulled over to the curb, her pulse quickening as she watched her partner's distress escalate. In their partnership, Max's instincts had never led them astray. When he sensed danger, there was always danger. When he detected drugs, contraband was always found. His accuracy rate was legendary throughout the Atlanta Police Department. The moment Sarah opened the door, Max bolted like a missile launched from its tube. No command could stop him as he sprinted across the cracked asphalt, his tactical harness jingling with each powerful stride. Sarah cursed under her breath and gave chase, her boots pounding against the pavement as she followed her partner toward a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. "Max, heel!" Her commands fell on deaf ears. The dog had already found a gap in the fencing and squeezed through with surprising agility, disappearing into what looked like an automotive junkyard. Sarah's radio crackled as she called for backup, but she couldn't wait. Something had triggered Max's protective instincts, and after 6 years of trusting his judgment implicitly, she wasn't about to stop now. The junkyard was a maze of rusted car parts and abandoned vehicles stacked 3 high, creating shadowy corridors that reeked of motor oil and decay. Sarah moved carefully, weapon drawn, following the sound of Max's frantic barking that echoed off the metal walls. She found him at the far end of the lot, circling a police cruiser that had definitely seen better days. The vehicle's white paint was faded to a sickly yellow, its tires flat and rotted, but the Atlanta PD markings were still visible beneath layers of grime. Max wasn't just barking, he was crying. Deep, mournful sounds that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. He pawed at the driver's side door with increasing desperation, then looked back at her with eyes that seemed to plead for understanding. This wasn't the behavior of a dog who'd found contraband or sensed a threat. This was something else entirely, something that touched his soul. "What's got you so worked up, partner?" Sarah approached slowly, holstering her weapon as she took in the scene. The cruiser looked like it had been sitting here for months, maybe longer. Weeds grew through the wheel wells, and rust had claimed the bumpers like cancer. Yet Max treated it like it contained something precious, something worth protecting. Sarah tried the door handle. Locked, as expected. She peered through the grimy windows, but couldn't make out much in the dim interior, cluttered with shadows. Max whined and pressed his nose against the glass, his tail rigid with tension. Every fiber of his being screamed that this car mattered, that whatever was inside needed protection from forces he couldn't understand but instinctively feared. "Okay, boy, I hear you loud and clear." Sarah reached for her radio to call for a locksmith, but stopped when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Barely visible under a layer of dirt and rust on the rear bumper was a unit number she recognized all too well, 247. Her breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. Unit 247 had belonged to Detective Daniel Rodriguez, the same Rodriguez who died in that terrible car accident 3 months ago. The same Rodriguez who had worked briefly with Max during Sarah's recovery from a shoulder injury, sustained during a drug bust gone wrong. She remembered how quickly the two had bonded, how Max had seemed genuinely sad when Rodriguez returned him to Sarah after her medical leave ended. Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and for a moment Sarah could swear she saw recognition there. not just of the car, but of what it represented. A ghost from the past that refused to stay buried, a mystery that demanded resolution. "You remember him, don't you?" she whispered, kneeling beside her partner in the dirt. Max leaned against her leg, still focused on the cruiser, but taking comfort in her presence. "You remember Rodriguez?" The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the junkyard as Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out why Max couldn't walk away from this car, and why every instinct she'd learned to trust over the years was telling her that Daniel Rodriguez's story wasn't over yet. As backup sirens wailed in the distance, Max pressed closer to the cruiser, his determination unwavering. His nose traced the door seams as if searching for a scent only he could detect. Whatever secrets lay hidden inside that rusted vehicle, he wasn't leaving without them, and neither was Sarah. The bond between them had never been stronger than in this moment of shared purpose, even if she didn't yet understand what that purpose was. Rodriguez's ghost had called to them both, and they would answer that call together, no matter where it led. The locksmith's tools clinked against the rusted door handle as Sarah watched Max pace restlessly around Rodriguez's abandoned cruiser. Even with backup officers securing the perimeter of the junkyard, her partner refused to calm down. His ears remained pricked forward, tracking every sound the locksmith made with laser focus. "There we go," the elderly man muttered as the lock finally gave way with a metallic click that seemed to echo through the entire yard. "Haven't seen one of these old models in years. Must have been sitting here since before the department upgraded their fleet." Sarah nodded her thanks and approached the vehicle slowly. Max immediately pressed against her leg, his body trembling with anticipation. The moment she opened the driver's side door, a wave of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the lingering scent of Rodriguez's cologne, mixed with something else, something that made Max whine softly. The interior was a time capsule. Rodriguez's travel mug still sat in the cup holder, a thin layer of mold covering what had once been coffee. His sunglasses hung from the visor, and a small photo of his daughter was tucked into the dashboard frame. But it was what Sarah found, wedged beneath the passenger seat, that made her pulse quicken. "What have you got there, boy?" she whispered, as Max pawed at something metallic barely visible in the shadows. Sarah reached under the seat, and her fingers closed around a small digital recording device, its red light still blinking weakly despite months of abandonment. The device felt warm in her palm, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Max pressed his nose against it, tail wagging for the first time since they'd entered the junkyard. Whatever was on this recorder, he recognized its importance instinctively. Sarah glanced around at the backup officers who were keeping their distance, respecting the scene, but clearly curious about what had captured the K9 unit's attention. She made a quick decision and slipped the device into her jacket pocket. "Find anything interesting?" Detective Marcus Webb approached from behind, his voice carrying that familiar note of skepticism Sarah had grown to expect from internal affairs. Webb had been asking questions about Rodriguez's death for weeks, suggesting the accident report didn't add up. "Just personal effects," Sarah replied carefully, her hand instinctively moving to protect the hidden recorder. Max seemed to sense her tension and positioned himself between her and Webb, a subtle but clear message of protection. Webb's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. "Funny how this cruiser ended up here. The accident report said Rodriguez's vehicle was completely destroyed in the crash. So whose car is this?" "According to the plate, it's Rodriguez's backup unit," Sarah said, checking the paperwork the junkyard owner had provided. "Looks like it was brought here after being decommissioned." "Decommissioned why?" Webb pressed. "And when exactly? Because I've been through Rodriguez's files, and there's no record of him requesting a backup vehicle in the weeks before his death." Sarah felt Max tense beside her. The dog's training had taught him to read human body language expertly, and Webb's aggressive posture was setting off alarm bells. Max had always been protective of Sarah, but his reaction to Webb seemed unusually intense. "I'll look into it," Sarah promised, though something in Webb's tone made her want to get away from the junkyard as quickly as possible. "Right now, I need to get Max back to base. He's been acting strange all afternoon. Webb studied Max for a long moment. That dog always did have good instincts. Rodriguez used to say Max could smell trouble before it happened. He paused, his expression darkening. Maybe he still can. As they walked back to their cruiser, Sarah felt the weight of the recording device in her pocket like a loaded weapon. Max stayed close to her side, his protective instincts engaged. Whatever was on that recorder, it was important enough that Rodriguez had hidden it carefully. Important enough that Max had somehow known to find it. Back at the station, Sarah waited until the evening shift had thinned out before slipping into an empty interrogation room with Max. She pulled out the recorder and stared at its blinking light, suddenly afraid of what she might hear. Rodriguez had been her partner for 2 years before his transfer to detective division. Max sat beside her chair, his eyes fixed on the device. When she finally pressed play, his ears perked up at the sound of Rodriguez's familiar voice crackling through the small speaker. Day 12 of surveillance. Rodriguez's voice filled the small room. The weapons shipment is definitely coming through the port tomorrow night. Bradley confirmed the route and timing. But something's not right about this whole operation. There are too many inconsistencies in the paperwork, too many coincidences. Sarah's blood ran cold. Lieutenant Bradley was Rodriguez's direct supervisor and her current commanding officer. Max whined softly, as if he could sense her distress. Rodriguez's voice continued, "I've documented everything, but I'm starting to think the corruption goes higher than we suspected. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this. Max knows where I hide my backup evidence. That dog's smarter than most of the detectives in this department." The recording ended with a click that seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. Sarah stared at the device in her trembling hands, finally understanding why Max had been so desperate to protect Rodriguez's cruiser. He hadn't just been grieving a lost partner. He'd been guarding the evidence that could expose his killer. Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and Sarah saw something there she'd never noticed before. Not just loyalty or training, but a sense of purpose that transcended his canine nature. Rodriguez had trusted Max with the truth, and now that truth was hers to protect. Sarah's apartment felt different with Max, pacing restlessly across the hardwood floor, his claws clicking an anxious rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. She'd brought the recording device home, knowing the station walls had ears, especially with Lieutenant Bradley's network of corruption spreading through the department like poison. The digital recorder sat on her coffee table like an unexploded bomb. Max kept circling back to it, nudging it with his nose, before looking up at Sarah with those expressive eyes that seemed to hold secrets she was only beginning to understand. "You knew Rodriguez was in danger, didn't you?" she whispered, kneeling beside her partner. Max pressed his head against her palm, a gesture that felt more human than canine. "That's why you were so upset when he had to give you back to me." Sarah's mind drifted back to those 3 weeks when Rodriguez had been assigned as Max's temporary handler. She'd been recovering from surgery after taking a bullet to the shoulder during a drug bust gone wrong. The doctors had insisted on extended leave, and protocol demanded Max work with another officer rather than sit idle. She remembered Rodriguez picking up Max that first morning, how nervous he'd seemed about handling someone else's partner. "I'll take good care of him," he'd promised. "Just focus on getting better." But when Sarah returned to duty, something had changed between Max and Rodriguez. There was a connection there, an understanding that went beyond basic handler-dog dynamics. Rodriguez had been reluctant to discuss his current caseload during those final weeks. "Just routine surveillance," he'd said when Sarah asked. "Nothing exciting." Damn. But Max had started acting differently around Rodriguez, more protective, more alert, like he sensed danger that the humans couldn't perceive. Sarah pressed play on the recorder again, studying Max's reaction as Rodriguez's voice filled the room. The dog's ears perked up immediately, and he moved closer to the device as if trying to get as near to his former partner as possible. Day 3 of surveillance. Came Rodriguez's voice from an earlier entry Sarah hadn't heard before. "Max is incredible. That dog can sense things before they happen. Today, he alerted me to Bradley's arrival at the warehouse 10 minutes before I saw the car. It's like he can smell corruption. Sarah's blood chilled. Rodriguez had been using Max as an early warning system during his investigation. No wonder her partner had bonded so strongly with the detective. They'd been working together to expose the truth. The recording continued. I've been thinking about Sarah's shooting. The intelligence was supposed to be solid, but we walked into an ambush. What if it wasn't bad luck? What if someone tipped off the dealers? Bradley was the one who assigned us that bust. Sarah's hand flew to her shoulder, where the scar from her gunshot wound still ached on cold mornings. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Her injury hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated to remove her from the picture so Rodriguez could work alone, vulnerable and isolated. Max whined softly and placed his paw on her leg, as if sensing her distress. She scratched behind his ears, finally understanding why he'd been so desperate to protect Rodriguez's cruiser. He wasn't just mourning a temporary partner. He was guarding evidence that could bring down the man who'd tried to kill them both. Day 8, Rodriguez's voice continued from another entry. Bradley's getting suspicious. He's asking too many questions about my caseload, my sources. I think he knows I'm onto him. Max won't leave my side now. That dog's loyalty runs deeper than training. He genuinely cares about keeping people safe. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she imagined Rodriguez and Max working together in secret, both of them knowing they were walking into increasingly dangerous territory. Rodriguez had trusted Max with his life, and Max had tried to protect him the only way he knew how. The next entry was barely a whisper. They killed Jenkins last night. Made it look like a heart attack, but Jenkins was in perfect health. He'd been helping me trace the weapons shipments. I'm next, I know it. If anything happens to me, Max knows where I keep the backup evidence. That dog's memory is better than any computer. Sarah's heart pounded as the implications hit her. Rodriguez hadn't just hidden one recording device. There were more, and Max knew where to find them. She looked down at her partner, who was watching her with an intensity that seemed almost human. You know where the other evidence is, don't you, boy? Max stood immediately and moved to the window, looking out toward the city lights. His posture was alert, focused, like he was calculating distances and routes. When he looked back at Sarah, she saw determination in his eyes. Not tonight, she said firmly. It's too dangerous with Bradley watching us, but soon. We'll finish what Rodriguez started. Max seemed to understand, settling down beside her but keeping his gaze fixed on the window. The bond between them had deepened tonight, moving beyond the typical handler-dog relationship into something approaching partnership. Rodriguez had trusted Max with the truth, and now Max was trusting Sarah with that same burden. As the city settled into darkness around them, Sarah made a silent promise to both her partners, the living and the dead. Bradley's corruption would be exposed, Rodriguez's death would be avenged, and Max's loyalty would finally be rewarded with justice. The recording device sat silent on the coffee table, but its message was clear. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin, and this time, Sarah and Max would be ready for whatever Lieutenant Bradley threw at them. They had Rodriguez's ghost guiding them, and that made them more dangerous than Bradley could imagine. The morning briefing felt like walking into a trap. Sarah sat in the back row of the conference room, Max at her feet, both of them hyper-aware of Lieutenant Bradley's commanding presence at the podium. Every word he spoke about departmental integrity and officer safety felt like poison in the air. Officer Collins, Bradley's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. I understand you and Max had some excitement at the junkyard yesterday. Care to share what you found? Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her jacket pocket where Rodriguez's recording device was hidden. Just an abandoned cruiser, sir. Nothing significant. Max shifted beside her, his body language tense but controlled. Bradley's smile didn't reach his eyes. Interesting, because I received a call from the junkyard owner. He mentioned you removed something from the vehicle. The room fell silent, 20 pairs of eyes turning towards Sarah. I hope you followed proper evidence protocol. Of course, sir. Sarah's voice remained steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Everything was documented appropriately. Good, because I'll need you to turn over any materials you collected. For processing, you understand. Bradley's tone was casual, but Sarah caught the steel underneath. Internal Affairs is reviewing Rodriguez's cases. We want to make sure nothing was overlooked. Max's ears flattened against his head, a subtle warning that only Sarah could read. Her partner sensed the danger radiating from Bradley just as clearly as she did. "I'll get you that paperwork, sir." Sarah stood slowly, knowing she was walking deeper into Bradley's web. "Should I bring everything to your office?" "Actually, let's handle this right now." Bradley gestured toward the door. "My office. Bring Max too. I'd like to see how he's adjusting after yesterday's episode." The walk down the hallway felt like a death march. Max stayed close to Sarah's side, his protective instincts on high alert. Other officers avoided eye contact, and Sarah wondered how many were part of Bradley's network. Bradley's office was a monument to his 30-year career. Commendations lined the walls, photos with mayors and police chiefs created an impressive display. But Sarah noticed something new, a framed photo of Rodriguez on the bookshelf. "Terrible loss," Bradley said, following her gaze. "Rodriguez was a good detective. Shame about that accident." He closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. "Now, about that evidence." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out an empty evidence bag. "This is all I collected, sir. Some personal items, nothing case-related." Bradley's expression darkened as he examined the empty bag. "That's odd. The junkyard owner was quite specific about seeing you remove something electronic. A recording device, perhaps?" Max growled low in his throat, too quiet for Bradley to hear, but clear enough to convey his assessment of the situation to Sarah. They were in immediate danger. "I'm not sure what he thought he saw," Sarah replied carefully. "Maybe the reflection off Max's tags. It was quite sunny yesterday." Bradley moved to his desk and opened the top drawer. Sarah's blood froze when she saw what he pulled out, Rodriguez's service weapon, the one that should have been destroyed in the car accident. "This belonged to your former partner," Bradley said, setting the gun on his desk. "Funny thing about evidence. It has a way of turning up in unexpected places, just like recording devices." The threat was crystal clear. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her own weapon, but Bradley was faster. His gun was out and pointed at her before she could react. "I really hoped it wouldn't come to this," Bradley said with genuine regret. "You were always one of the good ones, Collins, but you and that dog just couldn't leave well enough alone." Max tensed beside her, reading the situation with perfect clarity. Sarah could feel him preparing to attack, but Bradley's finger was on the trigger. "Don't even think about it," Bradley warned, shifting his aim toward Max. Rodriguez made the same mistake, thinking his partner could save him. Didn't work out so well. "You killed him," Sarah stated, no longer bothering to hide her knowledge. "Rodriguez was a problem that needed solving, just like you're becoming." Bradley reached for his radio. "I'm going to call this in as an officer-down situation. Tragic training accident. Max attacked you. You defended yourself. But sadly, you were both killed." Sarah felt her world narrowing to this single moment. Everything Rodriguez had died for, all the evidence Max had protected, would disappear with her death. The corruption would continue, and Bradley would remain untouchable. But Max had other plans. The Belgian Malinois exploded into motion like a guided missile. Bradley's gun swung toward the dog, but Max was already airborne, 70 pounds of trained muscle and fury. The impact sent Bradley crashing backward into his bookshelf, certificates and photos raining down. Sarah dove for Bradley's weapon as Max pinned the corrupt lieutenant to the floor. Her fingers closed around the gun, just as Bradley reached for a backup piece strapped to his ankle. "Don't move!" Sarah's voice carried all the authority of 6 years on the force. "Max, hold!" Max remained poised over Bradley, his teeth inches from the man's throat. One word from Sarah, and the lieutenant's corruption would end permanently. Bradley looked up at her with something approaching respect. "You realize this doesn't end here. I'm not working alone. Kill me and you'll never find them all." "I don't need to kill you," Sarah replied, pulling out her phone to call for backup. I just need to make sure Rodriguez's evidence reaches the right people. Bradley's face went pale. You don't have the recording? Sarah smiled grimly. Max knows where Rodriguez hid the backup evidence. And unlike you, I trust my partner completely. As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah looked down at Max, whose loyalty had just saved both their lives. Rodriguez's ghost could finally rest in peace, knowing his truth would see the light of day. With Bradley in custody and internal affairs swarming the station, Sarah knew they had a narrow window before the corrupt network realized their leader was compromised. She and Max slipped out through the garage, avoiding the chaos that had erupted throughout the building as news of the lieutenant's arrest spread like wildfire. "Where is it, boy?" Sarah whispered as they drove through Atlanta's industrial district. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, his nose twitching as familiar scents triggered memories of his time with Rodriguez. Every few blocks, he would whine softly and paw at the window, but none of the locations felt right to him. Then they passed the abandoned textile factory on Marietta Street, and Max exploded into action. He barked urgently, scratching at the door handle with desperate intensity. Sarah pulled over immediately, recognizing the same behavior he'd displayed at the junkyard. The factory had been closed for years, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls making it a perfect hiding spot. Sarah followed Max as he led her around the building's perimeter, his nose to the ground, tracking a scent only he could detect. At the building's rear loading dock, Max stopped and began digging frantically at a loose section of concrete. His claws scraped against metal, and Sarah realized Rodriguez had hidden something beneath the surface. "Good boy," she breathed, pulling out her tactical knife to pry up the concrete slab. Underneath, wrapped in waterproof plastic, was a manila envelope thick with documents and photographs. A second recording device was taped to the outside. Sarah's blood ran cold as she examined the contents. Photos of Bradley meeting with known arms dealers, shipping manifests with forged signatures, bank account numbers showing wire transfers worth millions. Rodriguez had documented everything, creating an airtight case against the entire criminal organization. But it was the final photograph that made her stomach drop. Bradley shaking hands with Captain Morrison, Sarah's own commanding officer, while boxes of weapons were loaded onto a truck in the background. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "How high does this go?" Max pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. His loyalty to Rodriguez had led them to evidence that would bring down not just Bradley, but potentially half the department's leadership. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You have something that belongs to us. Pier 47, midnight. Come alone, or the dog dies." They knew. Somehow Bradley's network had already regrouped and identified Sarah as the threat. She looked down at Max, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. "They want to trade," she told him, "but we're not giving up. Rodriguez trusted you with this evidence, and we're going to make sure it reaches the right people." Sarah called Detective Webb from Internal Affairs, the only person she trusted to handle the evidence properly. When he answered, she could hear the stress in his voice. "Collins, where are you? Bradley's lawyer is claiming you planted evidence. Morrison wants you brought in for questioning." "Morrison's dirty too," Sarah said quickly. "I found Rodriguez's backup evidence, photos, documents, everything, but they've got me cornered. Pier 47, midnight." "Don't go," Webb warned. "It's a trap." "I know, but they threatened Max. I won't let them hurt him." Sarah's voice hardened with determination. "I'm sending you GPS coordinates to the evidence location. If something happens to us, make sure Rodriguez's truth comes out." As darkness fell over Atlanta, Sarah and Max drove toward the port. She'd called in favors from officers she trusted, but couldn't be certain who else might be compromised. This would have to be her fight. Pier 47 was deserted, except for a black SUV parked near the water's edge. Sarah could see armed figures moving in the shadows, more than she could handle alone. But Max had other ideas. The moment they stepped out of the cruiser, Max's demeanor changed completely. This wasn't the loyal family pet or even the disciplined police dog. This was a predator who'd been waiting months to avenge his fallen partner. "That's far enough," a voice called from the shadows. A man stepped into the light, automatic weapon trained on Sarah. "Where's the evidence?" "Safe," Sarah replied, "along with copies that go public if anything happens to us." The man laughed. "You think you're the first cop to try this? Rodriguez thought he was smart too, right up until his brakes failed." That was the trigger Max had been waiting for. The confession, the admission of guilt, the mockery of Rodriguez's death. The Belgian Malinois launched himself through the darkness like a force of nature. The gunman's weapon swung toward the attacking dog, but Max was already inside his range. 70 pounds of muscle and fury drove the man backward into the pier's railing. The gun flew from his hands, disappearing into the dark water below. Sarah drew her weapon as more figures emerged from cover, but Max was already moving to his next target. Years of training and months of suppressed rage turned him into something almost supernatural. He moved like Rodriguez's ghost made manifest, striking down the men who'd killed his partner. "Max, heal!" Sarah called, but her partner was beyond commands now. This was personal, and he wouldn't stop until Rodriguez was avenged. The fight was brutal and swift. When the harbor patrol arrived, drawn by the gunfire, they found Sarah standing over 3 unconscious men, while Max sat calmly at her side, his tactical vest torn, but his spirit finally at peace. Detective Webb arrived with the sunrise, Rodriguez's evidence already in the hands of federal prosecutors. "Morrison's been arrested," he told Sarah, "along with 6 other officers. The weapons trafficking ring is finished." Sarah knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears as she'd done 1,000 times before. But this time was different. His duty to Rodriguez was complete, his loyalty finally rewarded with justice. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "Rodriguez can rest now. We both can." Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes, and for the first time since the junkyard, Sarah saw peace there. The ghost had been laid to rest, and they could finally move forward together. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the federal courthouse steps, Max beside her in his dress uniform harness, both of them watching as Lieutenant Bradley was led away in shackles. The jury had taken less than 2 hours to convict him on charges of murder, racketeering, and weapons trafficking, life without parole. Captain Morrison had received the same sentence the week before. The weapons trafficking ring had been completely dismantled, with Rodriguez's meticulously gathered evidence serving as the prosecution's cornerstone. 12 corrupt officers, 3 federal agents, and an entire network of arms dealers now faced decades behind bars. "Rodriguez would be proud," Detective Webb said, joining them on the courthouse steps. He'd been promoted to head internal affairs, tasked with cleaning house throughout the department. "That evidence you and Max found was the key to everything." Sarah nodded, her hand resting on Max's head. Her partner had become something of a legend within law enforcement circles. The dog who'd refused to let his handler's murder go unsolved, who'd protected crucial evidence for months until the right person found it. "The police commissioner wants to present Max with a commendation," Webb continued. "Full ceremony, media coverage, the works. You've both earned it." Max's ears perked up at the mention of his name, but his attention remained focused on something across the street. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. A young woman in her 20s, with Rodriguez's distinctive dark eyes and gentle smile. "That's Rodriguez's daughter, Maria," Webb said quietly. "She wanted to thank you both personally." Maria crossed the street, her steps hesitant but determined. When she reached them, she knelt down to Max's level, tears streaming down her face. "Papa told me so much about you," she whispered to Max, her voice thick with emotion. "He said you were the smartest partner he'd ever had, that you could sense things before they happened." Max sat perfectly still, allowing Maria to wrap her arms around his neck. Sarah felt her own eyes water as she watched the reunion between the daughter and the dog who'd avenged her father's death. "He knew he was in danger," Maria continued, looking up at Sarah. "The last time I saw him, he told me that if anything happened, Max would know what to do. He said that dog had a memory like a steel trap and a heart bigger than any human's. Sarah knelt beside them. Your father saved a lot of lives with his investigation. Max just made sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Maria pulled a small object from her purse. Rodriguez's badge, polished to a mirror shine. I want Max to have this. Baba would want his partner to carry on his legacy. Webb stepped forward. Actually, we've been meaning to discuss that with you, Collins. The department wants to establish the Rodriguez Memorial K9 unit. Max would be the first dog officially designated as a detective, not just a patrol officer. Sarah looked down at Max, who seemed to understand every word. His tail wagged once, a dignified approval of the honor being bestowed upon him. Detective Max, Sarah said, testing the title. I think Rodriguez would love that. The ceremony 3 weeks later was held at Atlanta Police Headquarters, with media from across the country covering the unprecedented promotion of a police dog to detective status. Max sat at attention as the commissioner pinned Rodriguez's badge to his tactical vest, now permanently modified to display his new rank. Detective Max exemplifies the very best of law enforcement, the commissioner announced to the assembled crowd. His loyalty, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to justice serve as an inspiration to officers everywhere. After the ceremony, Sarah and Max returned to their patrol car, but everything had changed. Max now wore Rodriguez's badge alongside his own K9 identification, a permanent reminder of the partner who'd trusted him with the truth. Their first call as detective and handler came within hours. A suspicious death that other investigators had written off as accidental. Max's nose led them to evidence that revealed murder, and Sarah's interrogation skills sealed the case. As they drove through Atlanta's streets that evening, Sarah reflected on how far they'd come. Max had evolved from a grieving dog protecting his dead partner's memory into something far greater. A symbol of justice that transcended the boundaries between human and animal. You know what, Max? Sarah said as they pulled into their driveway. I think this is just the beginning. Max looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, Rodriguez's badge glinting in the streetlight. The ghost that had haunted him for months was finally at peace, but his mission was far from over. There would be other crimes to solve. Other victims who needed justice, other corrupt officials who thought they were above the law. Rodriguez had trusted Max with more than just evidence. He'd entrusted him with the responsibility of protecting the innocent and serving justice, no matter the cost. And Detective Max, the most famous dog in Atlanta Police Department history, was ready for whatever came next. As they walked toward their home, Sarah noticed Max's posture had changed. The weight of grief that had burdened him since Rodriguez's death was gone, replaced by something stronger, purpose. He was no longer just Sarah's partner or even Rodriguez's avenger. He was Detective Max, protector of justice, and his watch had only just begun. The badge on his vest caught the moonlight one last time as they disappeared into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Rodriguez's legacy would live on through Max, ensuring that no crime would go unpunished and no corruption would remain hidden. Justice, it seemed, truly was best served with loyalty, courage, and an exceptional nose for the truth.